Good evening, everyone. My name is Julian Midville. I'm the chair of the Conservation Advisory Board. And we're calling this meeting to order at 6:03 today, and we'll get started with the approval of the minutes. So, if anyone want to review the minutes. Okay. Are there any suggested revisions to the minutes? No. Okay. With that, under unanimous consent, we will adopt the minutes for the August 28th meeting. Okay.
I have a question. Is all the discussions in breakout groups, or
this is that's the agenda for the minutes are referring to what we were talking about in August, the August meeting.
Oh, right.
And with that, we'll proceed on to public comments. Do you have anyone online?
We do not.
Oops. And with that, we will get started with regular business. Our first item is Central Issaquah Multimodal I-90 crossing project, and we will get started with that. Greg will be presenting that. Take it away.
All right. We're good. Okay. My name is Greg Lucas. I'm an engineer in the Public Works Department here today to talk about the Central Issaquah Multimodal I-90 crossing project. Our purpose of this presentation is to provide the tab with an update on the study for this project, and we provide an opportunity to discuss the crossing alternatives and the goals and evaluation criteria. All right, so what is this project? It's identified in our TIP project TR003. The scope of work is a 3 vehicular lane cross section, anticipated to be 1 lane in each direction with turn lanes, with protected bike lanes and 8-foot sidewalks on both sides of the street. This project was identified in the environmental impact statement when the Central Issaquah plan was developed, meaning with the anticipated growth in that region of Issaquah, this is a means for traffic mitigation as part of that growth. This project is located in the regional growth center portion of Central Issaquah, where up to 7,000 housing units are planned and over 20,000 jobs are planned. And this project is closely coordinated with the state DOT, the county metro, Sound Transit, and other parties along the way. And feel free to ask questions along the way. The benefits of this project is it helps connect North and South Central Issaquah together, and so it'll help mobility for vehicles, pedestrians, and bikes to get across I-90 in Central Issaquah. This project will also support the housing units and businesses within Central Issaquah by connecting the two portions. Additionally, there's a planned street network within Central Issaquah as part of that density anticipated there, and this is part of the street grid. And finally, even though we don't know where the light rail station will be quite yet, there's thinking about the light rail station as we're doing this plan. Both us and Sound Transit would like the two projects to have some synergy within one another, even though they're both very early. And so here's an update on what we've done so far in the study. Initially, we established an internal working group. This is kind of a cross-department set of staff to help guide the project. Got planners in that group, teams on the executive team, parks, you name it. And one of the things we did was establish and draft project goals and evaluation criteria, thinking about what we want this project to be, what we want it to accomplish. And then the consultant team that we hired is Jacobs Incorporated. They got a multidisciplinary team as well, with architects and geotechs, and a bunch of other folks. And they've kind of researched all the existing Issaquah reports, looking through the central Issaquah plan, all the geotechnical information that's available, traffic models, and also I looked at land use patterns for the future, just to help inform the study. And then we started looking at alternatives to get across I-90, and I'll have a few more slides on that, so we'll get into that in a little more detail. And we're kind of doing our initial outreach efforts for the project. There's an ongoing public survey on the project website. We'll be doing an open house later this year, potentially November 19th. Been meeting with some of the business owners within the corridor, as well as meeting with Sound Transit and WashDOT occasionally.
When is the open house, you said? October?
We're looking at November 19th right now.
What's the overall project schedule? Okay. I mean, I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but you must have some projections.
That's a great question. It's a long-term project. So for the study, we're looking at next spring to be complete. And the objective of this study is basically just to determine the crossing location within the growth center. And once the study is done, we'll have enough information to be more competitive for grants to advance the design. And so in terms of overall implementation, it's not going to be within the next 10 years. So we're trying to beat the light rail.
And specifically on the light rail planning, there's some dependencies here, especially given that the goals are related to serving the light rail. Are we going to know enough about the light rail by spring to have a Brooklyn crossing one?
We won't know. I don't believe South Transit will have started their study, but Jacobs is a firm that works a lot with Sound Transit. Really got a lot of experience. And so as we're thinking about our crossing alternatives, we're also thinking about, where's enough room for a station and a park and get this all stitched together. But it is a difficult task. However, it's even more difficult once Sound Transit determines their location, and then we got to kind of work around them. So we're supposed to be a little bit out of them to kind of help city road. But did that answer your question?
I think so. I'm still a little bit confused about the dependencies and the order of that.
Yeah.
It sounds like kind of leaving that up in the air.
It is, yeah. Until they get started, we won't really know. But what we do know is kind of what what they call a representative project. They're going to central Issaquah and just right around the SR 900 crossing. They're tied with obviously budget challenges, and so the further east, that's less likely to go further east with more money. And with being an end of the line station, they need extension past the station to kind of do crossovers and whatnot. So we're using what information we know to kind of help guide our study. But it's tough. So we started very high level, looking at alternatives. And see the highlighted area is the growth center. And basically we started with no idea it was a bad idea. It was just magic marker lines on a piece of paper, essentially, and connecting existing and potential future nodes. And then from there, we try to bring it back to earth a little bit, looking at initial feasibility challenges. Quite a bit here. Obviously, there's a high water table within central Issaquah, which makes going under I-90 a challenge. There's on the north side of I-90, there's a drainage ditch and a Fish Passions culvert that the state will be upsizing to a box culvert sometime in the near future.
Where is that? I saw that in the reading and I was just curious where that was.
The box culvert,
The cost, where is it going to?
basically right in the middle of central Issaquah, kind of before it meanders a little, or the radius.
And those three pink boxes, is it on the middle with the left pink box?
Yeah, something there, exactly. Yep.
And that just feeds water underneath I-90 to the drainage ditch.
Yeah, exactly. Comes from south of 90 and goes across I-90 to the north, and then north.
I'm just wondering, is it Tibbetts Creek or is it Issaquah Creek or do you know?
No, this one's, I think it's just called an unnamed.
Gotcha. Okay.
It was scheduled to be in the design bid package that WashDOT's about to select a contractor for, but I think we got pulled out and do different.
I was just curious. That's okay. Thanks.
Tibbetts Creek is over Tibbetts Creek is over to the left of I-90, just barely up the screen on the upper left side.
I was thinking of a different.
But Issaquah Creek runs right through there. Weird for a fish passage to be rails. I don't know, there's already passage there.
It's weird. I think there's 5 total ones. Another challenge we have are existing grades, with I-90 and Pickering Place and Gilman all being at similar elevations. It's tough to find enough length to get up and over. So if I-90 was in a valley, it'd be a lot easier to connect. So we got to find enough runway to get up and get clearance over, I think. Challenge for us. And as we're going through this, we're trying to limit the impacts both to existing businesses and structures, as well as kind of thinking about how we think it's going to redevelop and minimize the impact to future developments. The limited termination points that exist today make it a challenge as well, especially on the north side. And then we want this to be user friendly. We're trying to make this so everybody's going to want to use it and kind of activate the area. And so after we applied all of these challenges, we kind of narrowed down to 5 concepts. Get into those next.
More setup question here. I've heard the concept of a lid park thrown about. Is that something that you guys are ever talking about, or is that just?
I heard that here.
Okay.
I heard that in Bellevue, but not.
Well,
A lid park, like over the highway. Seems like whether it's an overpass or underpass would have some pretty big effect.
Right.
Right.
Well, I think we have enough lawyers as we're surrounding that Monday.
Yeah, exactly.
Alarms.
So kind of work, I guess, west to east. That's the first one is 11th Avenue on the north to 12th Avenue on the south. On the south end, you can kind of see it meanders to the west. That's in order to catch as much length to get more grade before we get to I-90. And then however much more clearance we need, we'll have to raise Gilman up in order to make it work. Probably 3 to 4 feet. And it goes up and over I-90 across the drainage area just north of I-90. And a lot of these alignments aren't set in stone. We're working through this. So it doesn't have to go exactly like this, but we're trying to squeeze between the pet storm those. I'm sure the time will left up here.
Is that a landscape, the greens, that's a landscape restored area, or that's like wetland critical area?
Yeah, it was in the interchange. Yeah. Or,
On the north side of 90, rebuilt. Is that probably a ditch or is it?
yeah, it's a ditch. It all just kind of got restored. I know the tribes have a lot of interest in that area as well.
So the question on the profiles, are the profiles from the south side to north side?
Yes, I believe.
And so were they just controlled by the grades, no more than 5% grade?
Yeah.
And if they go greater than that, then they don't have to raise Gilman Bill. That's in
Right.
general.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's what ADA goal to not go more than that. It's right with ADA. Also bike safety. It's easier to bike safety.
And all these alternatives are just 2 lanes, one in each direction with
Yeah, and turn
5 or 6 foot sidewalks.
exactly. Actually, 8 foot sidewalks.
It's really, turn like in the.
Yeah, three lanes. But I don't think we need 3 to get all the way across, but you'd have it at Gilman and at 11.
So you can narrow it then.
Across, yeah, you could. Yeah, 5 foot protected bike lanes could be a landscape strip or amenities in between the vehicles. And
All the way across the top more of the modern disclosed standards.
yeah, and then an 8 foot sidewalk.
How many lanes do we need?
I don't think we want to put too many. It's a good question. It's kind of a choice to, do we want this to be a major thoroughfare like SR 900, or we want this to be kind of friendly? And so that's where the traffic model shows.
What's the cost per added foot in width or something like this?
That's something we're going through in the.
Like just like a 5 foot sidewalk versus 6 foot sidewalk. Is that $200,000? I assume it's not. It's millions of dollars. So it just helps understand.
Yeah, I'd be speculating. So we're getting to the cost. Mostly just what can we do? What are possible? Next alternative's a little bit further east. Ties 11th Avenue into a identified street on 11th on the south side. In order to make this work, we'd have to raise Gilman on the south side 18 to 20 feet, something like that. We're also showing lower 990. Could be a challenge getting the box forward. So we want to either get rid of that or reduce it at least as much as possible.
So can they do the reverse where they raise 90 up over?
Got one alternative like that.
And that's further down. East.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's the creek on the north side still a challenge here for that. So it's, from a crossing perspective, it's pretty good, but the impacts to the rest of the area is more substantial.
What's the business at the bottom?
And that doesn't line up with the streets because that goes right into the shopping center there.
Yeah, it's Hobby Lobby.
Right on the right side.
Okay.
Indian restaurant.
Yeah, if we can stick some questions just about the context of the map, and then we can start discussing the pros and cons afterwards. That'd be great.
You want to go back through all the alternatives and then go back?
Yeah, so let's let them explain what each of these maps mean. If you have any questions about just the technical layout of it, please ask them, but we'll get back and go through again and talk about them for this table that you have here, just to make it efficient.
Yeah.
And the north side of the map, that's where like Gurks and Big Lots and all those are, right?
Yep. This alternative is kind of a similar location. Get the alignments not set in stone here, but this is if we wanted to cross in about the same location, but if we didn't want to impact either I-90 or Gilman, this is just kind of a demonstration of how much longer it would have to be where it could tie in. It'd be tying in at the Newport and Maple intersection, potentially making it a 5-legged roundabout, elevating up over Gilman, get across, tie back into 11. This concept is.
Sorry, up and over again, and like would it connect together?
Oops. The crossing itself wouldn't. I would like to see some way to get up and down off of this crossing to get on and off again. It's a spiral connection.
So they would just have to take a right turn to the roundabout and go back on the board.
Right. So the vehicles will get vehicles in this concept. Next one is raising up I-90, going underneath it. I am into the new Costco developments into Maple. It's a challenge with raising I-90. We'd have to maintain all the lanes during construction, the heavy lift in itself, and the added vehicles would turn that new roundabout at Costco into a signalized intersection.
Is there, so it seemed like before the grade is pretty similar on like Lake Drive and I guess it's Maple at that point to the highway. They're both like 62 on one side, I think, maybe slightly off the other. So you could kind of raise or lower I-90. Was there an alternative considered and thrown out for some reason of lowering I-90?
At this location?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was our initial, I can't remember exactly why we couldn't do it. But that was our initial goal for this crossing location, was to go up and over. The consultant couldn't make it work. Last alternative is another big long one. This is how we could connect Maple on the south to 11th on the north. Watched out right away, plus tying into 62nd. I don't know how much, I think we're kind of ready to eliminate this one, but it doesn't really meet a lot of our guest goals for the project. But this is how we could connect 11th. And so, I don't know, I guess we could stop there and go through it. Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so can I go back to alternative 2 or 3, I think it is.
2.
Oh, no, 1. 3. So right there, after you looked at, rather than going right in front of the 425 and the businesses all right there, is we'll go another way, back behind it to the right side of it. If they have to go through the wetland, either bridge it or put a single column in the wetland and go for the roundabout rather than going right in front of the businesses. Doesn't make any sense. But going in the alleyway between the Petco and the 25 and left arm make a little bit more sense. And you have a little bit of a straighter curve coming from the other side. And then the other one, rather than having it coming from the top, come straight down and does an S curve, they can make that one more of a red curve. That way it smooths the whole alignment out. You wouldn't like kill businesses.
Right. No, I agree. Better. And this alignment is far from set in stone. If this, what's the judgment?
And I like the trying to keep you separate from the other one that goes back to post office so they but not right next to each other.
Yeah.
Evenly spaced between them.
Right.
What eventually would be 4 of them.
Yeah.
So what are your determining factors? Is it cost of price or is it permanent environmental impact?
Yeah, exactly. Big long list of that. But yeah, all the above.
I wanted to ask about the one where you're moving I-90. I'm assuming that would have a much larger impact on like road conditions compared to the time that it's being constructed than the other ones. Like this would, you have to do some, you mentioned it'd be difficult to reroute cars around this, right? So I'm assuming that like the impacts during construction are higher for this than for the other ones.
At least along the freeway, yeah.
Yeah.
The can imagine, I don't know if you've driven currently on I-90 near Eastgate at the T-Mobile headquarters.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that's kind of a lane shift over and S-curve narrow it up. It'd be a similar setup here with the additional challenge of raising things up, and there'd be all that's kind of the same plane. At least this would be a little bit even more challenging.
It's already bad enough.
Yeah.
Is lowering easier than raising because of soil settling times?
Lowering is not, I would say lowering kind of scares me a little bit more because of the soil conditions.
Yeah, so one of the alternatives
has links.
Right.
Particularly,
Yeah.
they've done some of
You
that.
can see the lake, stretch of highway, I think.
And GBLM, they've done the same thing where they've lowered, like some of the costs they've lowered it, and they have to have pump stations right there. Or pump.
Just like we're getting more spirit rivers or whatever, change that can be an issue.
Yeah, flooding has become.
I always worry about like a beaver dam off, like just on the north side and then back it all up.
So the second alternative, that's lowering 90, right?
Yes, yeah, that they're showing lower A990. I don't believe it's required. It's just you have to you can probably have to raise Gilman more.
Are there options to do like a spiral ramp up for non-motorized vehicles to allow for it?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
So then you can increase the range of the car.
Yes.
Be able to have
Yep.
a little bit more range.
Yeah, they're thinking about that, and also the one alternative where you can go under. You don't need as much vertical clearance for bikes and heads as you do, vehicles, and so you could have the cars kind of going steeper to get under. The heads can stay a little bit.
You don't have to maintain the interstate 15.5. You can do something for the overhead.
For the
the other
heads and bikes. I think that's how this one actually got. It went under. That's why.
That one also had a pretty steep grade. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to go on to project goals?
Sure.
A high level question on these goals. To me, I assumed a lot of people say huge cost difference outweighs everything else.
Yes.
And so what are you looking for, knowing that you have three options and one of them's half the price? A lot of these would matter a lot less. Like, what are you looking for then out of this? Is it you're anticipating that they could be similar price, and then if that's the case, you look more into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we want to do is have a holistic look at everything, and then I think the last box on the bottom of the highlighted area is mostly about how do we get this project implemented, what's competitive for grants, all the above, and so that is a big factor. So. So I don't know if you guys had an opportunity to look through this or if we want to go through these. Any questions about basically what we did is one of a few of our working group meetings, we kind of as our cross-departmental group, we just thought about just brainstorm ideas. What do we want? What do we don't want? And we looked at kind of common themes, and that's how this got organized. And there's opportunity to update this, refine it through meetings like through tab, surveys that will get from the public, and then that'll help us ultimately finalize this and try to help identify which one meets these the best.
Just for it to be, if you just go through just not the evaluation criteria, it's a lot of just the project goals and the issues.
Yeah, I think the project goals is probably the best column.
So do they vary by, I think the practical should know.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll kind of set up a matrix with all of our, kind of, I guess, goals and evaluation criteria and kind of see which ones meets the most needs and which ones do we value more. If we want to value the cost more, we can apply more weight to that. So yeah, the project goal is to have a preferred design concept that's compatible with non-transit light rail station, regardless of the location. Next one, optimizes efficient, safe movement of multimodal traffic across I-90 and closes gaps in the transportation network. You can kind of see we want to lower the walk shed, reduce collisions, feel safe, easy to solve that.
One thing suggestion is, the pictures really hard to read. I'm not sure, maybe I'll change that.
Yeah.
Can you blow that on the screen? See it.
Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. All right, the next goal would be arrive at a concept that accommodates multimodal traffic and relieves congestion at the FR900 street crossings. We're looking at travel times, regional mobility. That can make this project potentially more competitive for grants as well. Project that benefits the growth center, so we can make it more competitive. Next goal is to arrive at a preferred concept that supports the vision of the Central Issaquah as a livable, distinctive, connected, and sustainable town centers. Yeah, it's just how do the crossings meet the Central Issaquah plan? Compatibility with that. The next goal, arrive at a preferred concept that includes mitigation and adaptation elements that help achieve the Issaquah climate action plan goals. We have two in here are related to transportation to it reduces vehicle miles traveled and reduces dependency on vehicles.
The last performance measure for the category is design incorporates green streetscapes measured by SM cent square feet.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
The last column's kind of initial, how we're going to measure what we want out of this. So those are definitely up in the air. Measure what we want. So that's what. Next goal is to arrive at a preferred concept that is constructible and eligible for funding. Constructability grant funding, minimize the impacts to existing businesses. I think also in here is reducing the amount of square footage of opportunity for future development. That's all.
What does it mean with this crossing increase 15 to 20 minutes, those stress water? I guess those are two different, then those stress, walk shed, bike shed. Not sure what crossing increases 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think so. Just in general, more easy it is to walk around, the more people will do it instead of getting in the vehicles and driving around. So more kind of people that serves that can walk to where they want to go. Vehicles.
The walk shed is an area on the map, and if you can increase the size of that, it's covered by how far you can get in 15 to 20 minutes below stress. That's what we're talking about.
So is it projected that there's going to be more housing in this area then in the future? It's not like there's a ton of housing right there right now.
No,
But it's like, this is to go along with an expansion project that involves putting more housing there, so they're gonna need to be able to cross the highway. basically. Okay, that makes sense. Cause I was like, is there anyone that wouldn't be able to walk across there right now?
Well, there's the,
Yeah.
We walk to the Johnson.
there's very little housing in Central, in the growth center right now, but I think the plan calls for 7,200 or something like that.
Yeah, so that makes sense. This would be like very close to that zone.
Yeah. There's a few developers looking around right now. Nothing really too much going on. Mostly, all the Costco development is obviously on.
Well, the project is too far out for most housing developers, right? I mean, they're looking to return 7 to 10 years, not 20.
Right.
So in other words, that's not an indicator that there's not interest in the future. Right?
But this project would probably increase the how attractive.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, just because we have not, yeah, exactly. That,
Right.
yeah, the problem. Yeah. So
Right.
that's,
No, I just wanted to.
yeah.
The light rail will definitely spring.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of questions.
And a little bit now. But if you have any questions about design.
Well, I was wondering whether you're planning on waiting,
Yes, they will be weighted.
because I have opinions about how they should be weighted.
Okay.
And I also, so I do think that it's so hard to read this title. And I read it all before, but just the idea of making it efficient, multimodal, I think ranks pretty high. It's kind of odd to me that the congestion reduction seems really strange, and it seems like a really challenging thing to put as a criteria, because we're talking about vehicular congestion, and do we really want to be measuring, do we really want to be rating equal vehicular congestion that's possibly going to be there, whereas what we're really, you can't really reduce congestion. And so it makes me uncomfortable saying that one of the goals is to reduce congestion, since we know that's basically,
Right.
it's pretty difficult to do, it's very expensive to chase. And it feels like the trying to increase the watershed and increase the grid and all those other things that we've talked about to build a network that provides other ways to get around that are in fact affected by vehicular congestion. That seems like it needs to be weighted a lot higher. That's my opinion. And I wanted to just give that feedback as the next phase goes into maybe weighting these. But I also just think easing congestion is always a fraught thing to write down as a goal. Because as soon as you build it, it's going to fill up again. So you're not really going to be able to just reduce or get rid of the congestion. And I also think it's really important to think about that the cost is important, but it's also not just the absolute cost, it's what are we getting? And also, the more we get, the more eligible we are for federal and state funding. So I want to make sure, and I think it's pretty well captured the way we already have it, but just some of the discussion that we're having. I do think, of course, cost matters, but it's not just cost, it's what are we getting? And the more we're getting towards these loftier goals that we have about the Issaquah we want to see in the future, my assumption is that the more programs are going to be eligible, this could be more eligible, more competitive grants anyway.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that we continue to think of the cost in terms of what we're getting. And I think one of the things that makes me uncomfortable is the grid. Even though it's more expensive and it's more difficult to shut down, so the impact to I-90 traffic, the idea of having to spiral, that's just going to reduce, that's going to put friction on the idea of it's way less encouraging to walk across the corridor if you have to go up, So when I think about, you might save some cost and, by raising something and then whatever you guys.
It may not be as far, it might be just kind of a winding path.
I'm just saying that that's to me is friction, and that's less valuable to the vision I have of creating that grid across central Issaquah. And so I just want to make sure that we're really conscious of not just going for the cheapest option, but the option that we want to invest. We don't want to wish that we had done it differently in 30 years. And I don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. And so, of course, cost matters. But I just want to make sure that we're really cognizant of what we're getting from the different options. So that's my feedback.
So, do you want to go to the next slide? Because it seems like we're going to discussion already.
Oh, sorry. I think we were just discussing the criteria.
We will discuss criteria a little bit. The next, yes.
Oh, just
That's right. Okay, now.
So I agree with your point, but when I look at cost, and the reason why I think it is sort of above regular criteria is there's always other things we could spend the money on.
But we don't get, it's not, we don't, it's not like you can take that same amount of money and spend it on something else.
So in that case, then it sounds like however much the most you can get as a grant, like if it's funded by, is this all, did I miss it? Is it all funded by, none of it's funded by the city of Issaquah?
The study is currently funded by ARPA. The study is not funded by Citadel, but
the actual
cost, yeah. Right. Usually, monthly, the grants that we would apply for usually have a match portion.
So we'd be paying.
Yeah.
No, if you roughly ballpark the long range plan for this $100 million project, what's the cost to Issaquah that you'd expect?
Somewhere around 15% of the overall cost.
So 15%.
Right. So $15 million.
Does that include long-term maintenance costs?
That does not.
Right, and those become significant over time, so there is a cost.
That's with bridges, yeah.
And so we can make different decisions about where we're spending that money. And if it's, $14 million versus $15 million, but $1 million can also buy curb cuts at 20 locations. That's where I look at that's why cost is such an important factor, because there's always alternatives you can do with it. And I also see, what's happening with the city of Seattle, where they are now, they're laying people off. They're just because their budget's out of control and they don't have enough money. So to me, the cost of the project is above other criteria, but with this very important balancing factor of it's cost benefit. It's not just cost. Right. So I'm with you there. And that's what I'm saying. I agree with your point. I just think that there's no way to escape the fact that it's either we're raising taxes or we're using money that we could have used elsewhere for any portion that the city's paying for. And then for me, the number 2 one is actually the top one, because at least my understanding is the whole intention of this is meant to align with light rail. Yeah. And so if you're not designing it around light rail, then why do it, right? Because then you're going to be in a situation of light rail and it's not optimized for it. So that to me is number 2. And then I think the one other thing is it almost feels like we're talking about criteria that apply to the specifics of the design, but we're not talking about the specifics of the design. So I would almost be more interested in, I don't know whether it's 6 months from now or 3 years from now, you kind of figured out this cost benefit. Here's really the one that makes sense to do, from lowering the road or raising the road. These are things that we're not going to figure out here. But then there's options within that, right? Do you try and you spend more and do more of a gradient, or do you look at some other way to get pedestrians up? I think those are the decisions or advice opportunities that I think this board might be able to better provide like meaningful input But that's once again my opinion.
So, I think what we're hearing is like, obviously for the future stages, to have that weighing consideration, be a big part of, how we talk about this issue. But since we are running a little bit tough on time,
Can I?
yeah,
John Mortensen has.
sure, just John.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick point that much of the city's share of the cost of this project would come from traffic impact fees that are paid by developers. So, and I do think cost is very important, and the value for what we get for what we buy is also very important, and doing it right. But we don't have the flexibility to move the funds around to other city priorities that we're most likely going to spend for the city's match. Just wanted to make that little clarifying comment and let you go back to your discussion.
Thanks, John.
I can add a comment as far as all of these time to light rail. So we don't know if the future light rail is coming down, pick down I-90 yet. Supposed to turn and point it to the press center. Right. Because it makes a difference if it's staying on I-90 where the station's on I-90, and then the extension beyond it for storage and the crossover behind it, which would be another 800,000 feet. If we do that, but that's on I-90, then we're going to be rebuilding I-90 anyway. So I would plan a little bit more to project come off into the test and then I would do more.
Right.
So, break the discussion a little bit. If we want to go through, I think what would be most valuable for you in particular would be if we were to go through and talk about what we think about how each of these alternatives would align with these project goals and evaluation criteria. And so I'm not sure if everyone has had a minute to think about it, but since we are in downtime, everyone can take like a minute or so just to explain what they think about the alternatives and how they align in their opinions. So anyone can get started, but just take like about a minute person.
So I think for this first one, I know one of the things on there is like reducing congestion in SR 900, and I think this one would help a lot with that, because I know at least like whenever after school I'm trying to go somewhere, whether that be like the gym or a 5 sports or something like that, and I need to go across SR 900 to try and get from the south side to the north side is usually what's happening. That road just gets so backed up. So I think this would really help fix congestion. But I think at the same time, it could cause potential issues, especially at the end of 11th, where there's that kind of T intersection with SR 900. I know that intersection gets really backed up with all the traffic coming from like Fred Meyer area, coming back to where South Cup is, and then back across the bridge towards the south side. So I think that could be a potential issue if you're adding a bunch of cars coming from another I-90 crossing. I don't know if that makes sense, but like that intersection could just become a huge mess, which would be something that I need to be accounted for.
I might make a couple of generalizations here. Some things I see here, like we've got some pretty major changes in grade on like Gilman and ramps on the north side. And those can really kind of break up the area in a way that can be unhealthy. And you see that in a lot of cities. Yeah. So we really want to watch out for that and make sure that we consider what's connecting those places that we've now separated, what's the impact out there. In addition to that, we didn't really look at major bike thoroughfares, major bike routes. We kind of have an idea of what's a local or a feeder or a major road. But that would really help to look at like what bike networks are we connecting? What areas are we connecting for commuters, for example? Some of those are connected through like Fourth, but there are major areas that could benefit significantly from that.
My concern with this one is someone was just saying, Gilman backs up by the way, it's to me, it's almost like 4 points of a major traffic area. Or if it should be to move it a little bit, the whole crossing a little bit to the east, where these intersections are on both sides.
It also seems to me that it's just very close to the other overcrossing, and therefore it has less utility and opening up more different areas to traffic, because I think, isn't there already a pretty good bike overpass? If I'm thinking of the right area of town, there's a
Yes.
yeah, there's a really good bike overpass like right there. And you can use that as a pedestrian overpass. It's a little bit worse because it's grade, but for that reason, it's not as, I don't think it's as important to have an extra overpass here.
One simple metric that might align with a lot of goals may be just the length of the crossing.
Yeah.
So from one end to the other, the minimum length that you have to drive to use it, or walk or bike. The longer that is, probably the worse utility in a number of these areas.
Right, you want to be kind of stuck on there. Needs would get on it. Or like,
Yeah, there might be an exception to that where I'm thinking of. I think it was alternative 3, where it's almost like could be a bypass. And you might gain some extra benefit beyond that.
yeah, I agree.
I guess similar to that then is grade change requirement for existing roads. Right? But basically grade change rating that's not the actual pass overpass or underpass.
That was like a potential evaluation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of like passively caught, but it's not specifically. And yeah, some of these grade changes would have a big impact on kind of just the feel of.
Comments?
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, another factor I think to incorporate, which is already listed here, but I think it is distinctive enough between every one of these to really make a difference, is how closely it fits to the street grid, future street grid, and street gridding aspect. And so the fact that this is kind of a more wavy alternative compared to some of the other ones. I'm going to point out alternative 2, for example, which is very straight, which would fit really quite well with the future gridding in central Issaquah. Maybe alternative 3 might fit pretty well as well. Alternative 4. So those 2, 3, 4, those fit really quite well, but 1, 5, it's too curvy.
Yeah. Curves are also very expensive structures. So.
I think street gridding is something that we could consider for that to be very high importance.
I agree. I'm on Team Street Grid, and I have the exact same response. I do feel a little in the dark though about how it feels with the grade. And I want to echo, I agree with your point about it just, yeah, and of course in this view, it's impossible to know how it breaks up, but I'm all about the grid and the connectivity and not having to be separated. And I also think that Micah's point about the first one being the most important, I think the first and second one, if they're done right, could actually end up being kind of overlapping of the evaluation criteria. Of course, depending on the wild card being exactly where the alignment is, but I could see 1 and 2 kind of collapsing because it's all part of the same getting around, inviting ways to get around.
This is slightly unrelated, but I just think if you're going to bring this presentation to more people, this graphic is just very hard to read.
Okay.
Yeah. Designing this to have a larger text size would be very helpful.
Yeah. I've given this similar presentation a few times, but I have not provided this. I wanted specifically to ask you guys about the criteria. So this is my first time with this part of the presentation.
Is the impact on medium or small businesses something to consider in there? Like, whether to improve the quality of life, or
right?
We don't want like impact on big businesses can't stay, but
no, that's a great point. We just have existing businesses. We don't have it listed as
something to consider when we choose that alignment.
Somebody's just plow right through the middle.
Right.
I think there's a good overlap between the street grading aspect and also business, especially when I think about business growth expansion, especially on the north side of the freeway. Because those just look like parking lots right now, but obviously a lot of that is owned by Costco now. So looking at their expansion plans and other landowners in that area, about street grading and how cohesive is that network. So there's that issue, obviously. Avi, did you have any comments
About this one.
or any additional? Any other additional comments?
I have one more thing. We talked a little bit about long-term maintenance. That seems to be something that can have a pretty good impact on cities that get grants and then kind of get in over their heads. So I didn't see that as an evaluation criterion, but I think that should be in there.
Especially if we're thinking about putting like stuff like planter beds and stuff that could make it so that the costs of both construction and maintenance would be a lot higher. So I think putting trees overhead for shade is a good idea, but I also heard a lot of things about the exorbitant engineering requirements of putting trees on big structures. I think oftentimes that it can look very nice, but be very bad for the actual environment.
Yeah.
Costs.
Yeah. That's a lot of big trees on bridges.
For our last couple of few minutes of discussing this, I think what we've done is kind of exited out of 1 to 5. I think that's the consensus. There's really those, unless anyone else disagrees with that.
I don't think I have enough info yet.
We don't know.
I don't think we answered that.
These are concepts. I don't think they can.
This is problematic though.
So, Audie,
Yeah, so I was wondering, so one of the, which one, number 2, right? That was lowering I-90, and then number 4 is raising I-90. So do both of those have similar impacts on like how it'll affect traffic on I-90? Like will one of them mess it up more?
Not that I can think of. The only thing that jumps to mind is this one's going to have the challenge of the box culvert, which will really be a fixed elevation, or can't lower that box culvert once it's in. So that's the biggest challenge with lowering I-90s.
Okay, but both of them will like impact traffic.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something about creating developments around that. Like, are these developments, or housing is going to be targeting like low-income families, medium? Is that something to consider?
Potentially.
Not like exorbitant expensive.
Right. I don't know how all that fits in with this project, but a concept like this would fit very well if a developer, say on the south side, was very interested in figuring out how this would integrate with it. Parking's a challenge to go down in a structure on a development for the same reasons why going under this. And so raising Gilman could be a benefit for a developer. Stop.
One last query for you guys just to think about this more. How about impacts on green? How are you guys weighing the impacts of green space, particularly for that alternative 3 with that roundabout? Because that is a more wetland area next to the Fairgroves lot. And so
I thought planning wetland, no big deal, column in, bridge over.
You're gonna get the bid for that, Tom.
6-foot diameter impact. You can always mitigate that somewhere. So looking at the bigger picture, I wouldn't want to mandate and have something go around to cause additional impacts to businesses around because of what I consider and take the comment a little bit. But look at the bigger picture of it. So if you have to bridge it, it makes it better alignment, better access. But I don't think they should consider not impacting businesses that dog and islands right to the minimum businesses. That's not acceptable.
I'd like to see total paved area as a criteria, so like delta. How many acres are we paving for this?
Did you get, or does anyone else have any comments?
I think as far as green space goes, for most of these projects, it looks like it's a relatively small reduction in green space compared to other sorts of projects, especially since a lot of it is going through the air. And yeah, I don't see that being like an enormous. And would you assume that this isn't having a huge impact because it just doesn't have a huge footprint as a project?
There's a lot of existing paved areas.
Yeah.
So like north on the Pickering side, the trading paved parking lot for a paved road.
Yeah.
But it's certainly worth considering as we do this. It'll make permitting it easier the less new paved area we have.
So the other alternatives in this one particular wetland right there, you shift the line one way or the other, it's going to be equal. But on the other alternatives, we're not really impacted that one specific region. That's kind of the question then. Does that apply to just this alternative as far as impact to the wetland area versus the others don't have that specific impact?
Yeah. Well, because also could make expensive if you have to offset everything.
Did you get what you needed?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You're great.
Finish this last column for presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, just speak to it if it comes up.
Sure.
I didn't think of that. Oh, well, as a matter of fact, I can see why you have created it, but I think you could present with that.
One more comment on that, especially because parking lots. So they're paved parking lots now. They could be other uses.
Yeah.
So that's a big consideration. If you're, in perpetuity designating them as streets now, that could actually take away from a lot of potential.
I was going to say the larger impact is if some of those parking lots could be turned into green spaces, if there's a lot more walkable access to that area.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, or if they're
Reduce total mileage traffic.
part of the reason that region is so not dense is because there isn't a lot of housing nearby, so it can't be. So they have to have parking lots to bring in people, right?
Dan, go to the next steps.
All right, yeah, so next ups for us, we got our open house, we got the survey going on. Other presentations we're doing for this. All right, going around introducing the projects, getting feedback early, and then we'll be finding 2 or 3 concepts a little bit further, trying to get it visualized with the architect and see how does it look actually, 3-dimensional space, meet the criteria, kind of match up alternatives with the criterias. We kind of continue to reach out to some transit and watch that. We'll have a couple council meetings mixed in there as well. More questions?
Do you like any of these design concepts?
They're all a challenge, and I've kind of wavered on which one I like the most quite a few times. But it's a fun exercise because part of the challenge or the exercise is what is the future of Central Issaquah and how does this fit in, not just in 2024, but in 2034, 2044.
One of the reasons I ask is, if we're already too narrow in the way that we're thinking about this, and we really look at it and say we need better concepts, then we might think about going back and looking at our initial assumptions.
That's why I was saying the Climate Light Rail should guide this, because that's also looking 20 years ahead. What we want things to look like now. Go over that area, then it's a good point. But there's nothing to me that I think will have more of an impact to like vehicle miles traveled than having light rail, have the right transportation to and from it so that people actually want to use it, right? It's useful.
Yeah.
So like a lot of these other things kind of tree up to, if that's done really well, they can be successful.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to assume that construction wouldn't begin on this until alignment is, obviously there's a huge investment in design, permitting, et cetera. But it would at least be very unlikely that construction would begin before that alignment is decided.
I think we would know exactly what's on Trans planning.
Before building any shovels around.
Exactly.
That's a bit of a consolation.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to start over, and I know that process is enormous and expensive to get to shovel ready, but at least if you haven't spent any money on construction, seems like a worthwhile, because you can't be behind it, you gotta be in front of it. But you'd at least know you aren't gonna break ground. So you know that for sure, that's helpful.
Yeah.
I might suggest saying that when that comes up in the outreach, meetings and so forth. Because it's very reassuring.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Well, would it be accurate to assume that having a plan already makes it easy to pivot, even if there are changes to the light rail plan?
Right. Like if we know, say, 4 years from now where the alignment is and ours doesn't work, at least we maybe have some backup. Yes, maybe. Yeah.
Plan will influence light rail.
That's what I was thinking.
I think it will. Yeah.
Fortunately, we have to get going. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. You got everything you needed.
Yeah. Thank you.
And so with that, we'll move on to the equity and transportation training with John Larson. Friends, I think we wanted to bring this back to the table because the last time we really had any pertinent discussions about equity were back, I believe, in 2021 when I first joined the board. And so we've had new people join us, and I think we
didn't solve it.
We didn't solve it. No, this is going to have to be an ongoing thing, ongoing thinking practice that we'll have to do. And so hopefully this will kickstart that longer term process of really making sure that we're integrating equity considerations into what we're doing in terms of policy time, thinking about how we're incorporating the needs of the community. That's what we're doing. So I'll let take it away.
Yeah, thank you. So first, I've been thinking about, we had such a great discussion about the crossing. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the presentation portion of the training. I had, as you saw on the agenda, plans for small groups and then report out. I think I want to divide this into two pieces. So I think what I want to do is give the presentation, still turn off the camera and microphone to answer any questions from the presentation, and then turn it back on and close. And then we can come back and do small groups maybe next month or after. Does that sound reasonable? Because I don't want to rush this at all, because I think it's too important. Cool. Okay, on that note, you know who I am. I'm John Larson Friend. I am the Transportation Program Coordinator here at the city, and I am going to give the equity and transportation training this evening. So my qualifications for this, basically, Julian, I believe it was you that brought this idea back when Sentinel was chair and the vice chair. The idea that we've done equity training, it's been a while since we've never done one specifically on transportation. So I had a lot of conversations with HR and clerks and all these different parties to figure out exactly, should we hire consultants, should we find someone with expertise, etc. So then it really came down to, I have the qualifications, frankly. My main area of study in graduate school was equity and transportation. I did several projects along those lines. Plus, I entered the program around a time that equity was just everywhere. It was a part of every conversation, and I carried that forward. So that's why I'm here and not some random person to give this presentation. So on that note, So the agenda this evening, slightly different than it says up here. We're going to go through key concepts, walk through some structural racism in transportation, look at history, looking at Seattle and Issaquah, and then the plan was to do small group discussions. I think we're going to, as I said, bump that to a different meeting. So I think we could have some really good, robust discussions, but we would have like 10 minutes to do that, so I don't want to do that. Also, just for the sake of time, if you have any questions that arise during the training presentation portion, go ahead and break down your questions. And then, as I said, we'll turn off the camera and we'll do some Q&A on anything that might have popped up. So the goals this evening are to ask questions after, and then learn something new, contemplate your equity lens, and request additional information if needed. Before we dive in, I want to just set the stage a little bit for the group here. So there's a few things that I want to highlight. I'll just walk through them. So first, acknowledge the past. It's important to recognize that people in the past often believe that they were doing the right thing based on the knowledge of their time. Learning and growing, just as we can look back and see areas for improvement, future generations will likely do the same thing with our actions today. Focus on progress. Our goal is to learn from the past and make continuous improvements and not to place blame. And finally, and I think this is probably the most important of the four, empathy and understanding. Let's approach this conversation with empathy for ourselves and for others, understanding that growth is a process. So we'll dive in now. This is heavy topics, and but I think it's really obviously valuable to talk about. So let's dive into key concepts first. So very simply, what is mobility? Mobility is getting from A to B. Accessibility is the ease of reaching those destinations, and that's people going to places. Equity is the concept of the fair and just distribution of resources, opportunities, and treatment, ensuring that all individuals and communities, especially those historically marginalized, have access to what they need to thrive. And this one is the piece it's the big main takeaway that I want you all to walk away with. If you don't remember anything else, this is the one thing that I would love for you to take away from today. An equity lens is a systematic examination of how different groups will likely be affected by proposed decisions. It's used to eliminate and prevent adverse consequences. So the next couple images, I really love this illustration. So equality, looking at equality versus equity, equality is providing everyone with the same resources or opportunities. That's been such a goal for the last 50 years or so, I would say, of our society. But that doesn't always work for everybody. If you give a bike of the same size to 4 different people, they're going to have 4 different needs. Equity, on the other hand, is providing everyone with resources or opportunities based on their specific needs to ensure everyone can achieve the same level of success. So, obviously, wheelchair-bound, specialized bike, big bike for someone like me, and then a smaller bike for a child. Also want to touch on the concept of horizontal and vertical equity. Horizontal equity is the principle that individuals with similar circumstances should be treated equally. Transportation-related individuals with similar transportation needs and circumstances have access to equal transportation services. So, for example, all the kids have little bikes. On the other hand, we have vertical, which is the principle that individuals with different circumstances should be treated differently based on need. Transportation related focuses on providing different levels of service and the varying abilities to each group. An example of this would be offering more frequent service or specialized services to areas with higher needs, such as low-income neighborhoods, elderly populations, and people with disabilities. So thinking about policy decisions, that's what we're here. We're thinking about programs and policy. These are just some questions to keep in the back of your mind as we're having these conversations with Greg and Thomas and myself and John. What are the racial equity impacts of a particular decision? Who will benefit or be burdened by the particular decision? And are there strategies to mitigate unintended consequences? I want to note that the city has another committee called the Equity Committee, probably aware of, and the city also has an internal equity framework that we work from. So every project and every policy, we always start with the equity framework, which is really helpful. It's a list of 10 or 15 questions to think through as you're developing projects. Okay. Let's dive into structural racism and transportation. So structural racism is primarily characterized by white supremacy, the preferential treatment, privilege, power, access, and opportunities for white people at the expense of cumulative adverse outcomes for people. This is a quote from The Conscious Kid. It's a really cool educational resource out there. Provides books and other education materials around these topics. Relating to transportation, it is the way that the public policies, institutional practices, and other norms have contributed to racial inequity in transportation. This could include redlining, highway construction, transit agencies, and who they operate for, and transportation costs in general. Transportation has been an essential piece of civil rights and equity for at least since the 1950s, probably before that. I hope we're all fairly aware of Rosa Parks and Freedom Riders and the role that buses had in those movements. Just also want to highlight Claudette Colvin, who's a 15-year-old in 1955 who refused to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama. It was right before Rosa Parks did, and her actions sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, which did lead to the Supreme Court ruling that segregation in interstate bus and rail stations were unconstitutional. So those little actions led to huge outcomes. Always have to include some graphs. So this data is a little bit older. It's about 15 years old at this point, but it's still super, super relevant. On the left side, we have bus ridership by race, and on the right, we have rail ridership by race. Black bus ridership has remained relatively steady since the 1980s, while white ridership has fallen largely. And then white rail ridership has remained relatively steady, while black ridership has remained low the whole time. Which
Could you go back to that graph?
absolutely.
The blue and the yellow and black.
I did that. And I was like, oh, you could do that? That's cool. Thanks for flagging that. Ew. Oh, that's what he did before. Okay. So that, in turn, begs the question, whose transit are we subsidizing? Granted, the cost of rail is much higher than the cost of bus infrastructure. But it does indicate that we are willing to put those dollars toward the shinier, cleaner type of transportation over, say, buses, which have, stigmatized and typically used by much lower income folks. The implications of transit, those who are transit dependents, access to jobs and opportunities. If you are carless and do not have access to a car, you're restricted to your bus.
I'm fine asking this question.
Oh yeah.
On the camera. So the difference for rail and bus and the investment is there like is one of the driving factors that like the decisions on where rail is put, not so much the investment dollars in rail versus bus, it's that rail by its nature of being in a fixed location means, so it's about that. It's not necessarily like the dollars. It's not like you're saying it's better to just spend much more money on buses. It's more when you're picking a location, it's a fixed location. And so if you're putting money into that.
Yeah, it's all in there. It's just a good question to ask in regard to this type of data as well. Yeah, good question. Okay, so going back to this, X jobs and opportunities. If you are carless, then you are dependent on where the network goes, and therefore you have to find jobs and opportunities along those networks. Time spent commuting, I think we're all fairly aware that the time on the bus typically takes much longer than time in a car. A 15-minute trip in a car can take 45 minutes to an hour, depending on where you're going by transit. Funding, beyond just funding rail versus bus, we put so many more dollars toward car infrastructure, roads. The state of Washington has a constitutional piece to it where all gas tax must go to car infrastructure, and there is no way to put those dollars, which is large, over to bus, transit, etc.
But the huge tax on gas from the CCA, that doesn't go to cars.
That a good portion of it does, but it's we can go. I can look into that more. Yeah,
I think it's specifically the base gas tax that is restricted. It's taken up on any additional tax.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That base, which has been a big issue that's popped up.
It's not that much to consider.
Actually,
yes. Well, there was some constitutionality questions around the CCA. Could they even put those extra taxes on top of the gas taxes? So that's and then moving on. So looking at transit, obviously you have choice if you have car access to a car versus being dependent on the transit system. Another good question to ask is, without a car, can you flee a natural disaster? We all have a wildfire risk here in Issaquah. Issaquah I-90 is one nice big fault line, which is super fun. So that is a question that absolutely needs to be asked going into the future. And the city of Issaquah are asking those questions. The city is integrating transit-dependent residents into emergency plans. I talked to the emergency manager, and his example was they're integrating transit-dependent folks into the wildfire integration study that we're doing now. Looking at car ownership by race, I think these numbers speak for themselves pretty clearly. People of color have a much less likelihood of, or a much greater likelihood of having no access to a car. And there are several factors that go into that, but a few of them include economic inequality, which white households generally have higher incomes and more generational wealth. Credit access and loan terms, racial discrimination. The auto loan market is well documented. Black, Latino, Asian borrowers often face higher interest rates versus white borrowers. And historical and systemic barriers. There's historical factors like redlining and discriminatory lending practices that have long-term impacts on wealth accumulation and access to credit in general. I'll talk about COVID. So COVID obviously was a huge disruptor. It really tested our society's systems. Here in King County, transit service got multiple cuts along the way. There was, in order to get tested, some people only had access to drive-through testing. I don't know if you all did drive-through testing, but I certainly did. So the question is like, who are making these emergency decisions? What services were cut versus being preserved? There's probably a very good chance that areas of lower ridership who serve people who need the transit most were probably for cut first, and as opposed to the core of King County's system. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, pun intended, I think. I want to talk about a little bit of history of Seattle and Issaquah. History is super important when it comes to these topics. Where we've come from really, really matters. The decisions that are made echo across time from the past and us going forward. So this is the first, in my research, this is sort of the first transportation and equity thing that I found for the Seattle area, very specifically. So the Seattle Transit Company, which is basically what Metro was back in the day, they hired their first black bus driver in 1945, and then quit 4 months later because the racial injustices that they faced on the job. That was 1945. Then there's redlining. This is a redlining map of Seattle. Does everyone know what redlining is, first of all? I'm going to define it. I just want to make sure. Redlining was a discriminatory practice where financial services, such as loans and insurance, were denied or limited to residents of certain areas based on racial or ethnic composition. This practice often targeted minority neighborhoods, making it difficult for residents to access essential financial services. I live in a redlined area, actually. I just bought a house in a redlined area. Then getting into the history of the ID, the International District in Seattle. Today, the International District has a long history of trauma and resistance. Historically, in the 1800s, when Seattle was first forming, it was the only place, this little block area was the only place that Native American or Chinese immigrants were allowed to live, period. So that's how this area really developed and grew into the Chinatown International District. And of course, we know it's split in two by I-5. So I-5 broke ground in 1957 in Seattle. It took 12 years to complete. And it basically went over the heart of the center of Asian American culture in Seattle at the time. This is the only picture I could find of a building in that area being demolished for I-5. There's not a lot. It's not very well documented, quite frankly. I couldn't find the number of buildings that were destroyed, but we know it displaced many people, destroyed many businesses, and most were uncompensated from the city or the state.
So not required to compensate.
Yeah, just take it. Yeah. There is a really cool exhibit, but more accessibly, a story map online called Nobody Lives Here. And it does kind of go through it's a walking tour that you can do, but you can just look around and it'll take you through some of the businesses and really cool buildings that got torn down that were in the center of where I-5 is now. I love dot maps. This is a dot map based on the 2020 census. It's a dot map by census block, so each dot there is one person in Seattle. Quite frankly, you can go down to the block group level, but everything gets even more segregated as you get lower and lower. Basically, in Seattle, 2020, 66% white, 16% Asian and Pacific Islander. And then in 1960, when I-5 was put over the top of this area, Seattle was 91% white and 3% Asian and Pacific Islander, which most of them were concentrated in that area. So really, really devastating to that 3%. There is some good news in Seattle's history of freeways. The map on the right there is the cities and states' original plan for freeways through Seattle, which it's extensive. Yeah, I was really stunned. I had never seen this before. And then on the left there is a rendering of what the interchange would have looked like right there, right off the floating bridge. This is as they interchange went to. I can't tell what I do.
It should have come up through with us.
Yeah. Yeah. But of course, this got stopped because it was going through predominantly white neighborhoods, so the whole city rose up, and we were saved. Seattle, I think we're probably all fairly aware of the history of racial disparity modernly in Seattle, but this is a really glaring statistic here. Between 2010 and 2016, the 7% that made up of Black people who made up the population of Seattle, they got 26% of the jaywalking tickets. Who hasn't jaywalked? Okay.
There are jaywalking tickets?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Not for you.
Careful cell phones.
So turning to Issaquah, this was really fun for me because I got to dive into Issaquah's history. So first of all, this is a photo of Issaquah from the air. I don't know exactly what year this was, but it was pre-I-90, so probably at least the 1950s or before. Very different context from Seattle. Didn't have to blaze through communities to build I-90 or anything like that. It was all farmland, all eminent domain, but minimal impacts to the community.
That's pre-I-90, because that's looking through
It's rainy.
Squawk on the left, Cougar Mountain.
Yeah.
Or no, Tiger on the
Tiger
left.
on the
Tiger, yeah, Tiger,
Squawk.
Squawk on the right.
And that's a railroad that's coming down on the lower left.
Correct. Yeah. It's just a road. After that little town out there, probably. So also wanted to highlight demographics in Issaquah. So in 1960, the population was 1,870. 88% white, 6% Asian American, and 0.9% African American. And I calculated it out. It's about 16 Black people who lived in Issaquah. 1970, the population actually quadrupled to 4,313. That was just in 10 years. And the demographics stayed largely the same. Nothing really changed there. Today, it's 58% white, 26% Asian American, and 1.7% African American.
What's the total population now?
Just over 40,000. Yeah. Which I calculated out around just under 700 Black folks who live within Issaquah. It begs the question, why is that? Like, it's only the amount of African Americans who live within the city has only gone up 1% since 1960. It's unfortunately largely a little bit by design. So, unfortunately, have to talk about the KKK. So, dusting off, I went to film school, dusting off my film degree. The KKK saw a resurgence in popularity in the 1920s across the country. Birth of a Nation came out in 1915. It's one of the highest grossing films of all time. It was the first film to earn more than $10 million then. And adjusted for inflation, it made the equivalent of $1.8 billion. It was an incredibly racist trope. And it, again, as I said, it led to this huge resurgence of the KKK across the US, including here. July 26, 1924, so just over 100 years ago, a rally took place on then George Tibbetts land. The rally was located actually at where the modern transit center is. It was one of the largest KKK rallies on the West Coast, with 13,000 people packed over there. There's also references to the KKK burning a cross several times on, quote, a ridge northeast of town, which I would expect is probably the Highlands. The city of Issaquah basically screamed, "Don't come here," to any African American. Side note about, since we're in Tibbetts Manor and talked about this being Tibbetts land, George Tibbetts is very much a founding father of Issaquah. He moved to what was called Squawk at the time in the 1870s. There's only about 30 people here. He really built Issaquah from the ground up. Hotel and businesses and economic stability. In fact, many thought that the center of town would be in this area because this is where he had all of his economic opportunities. He was also one of the framers of Washington State's Constitution. There's no record of him being involved in the KKK, but there are extensive records of his family, mostly his kids, being involved and attending KKK rallies, including a journal entry by one of, I couldn't confirm this, I think it was one of his daughters. The history of the genealogy gets hazy around that time, but they were involved in these things. There's also records from interviews with residents. The one I'm thinking of, I think, was probably in the 1970s or 80s. Interviews with residents who expressed the normalcy around lack of African Americans in town. I won't repeat the story here, but at this point, because it's not great, but very much like, well, yeah, they're not here. We don't have this type of people, basically. Also, records of deed restrictions here in the city. I wasn't able to track them down, but Stephen Padua said that he's found them in the course of his work.
Also found out that the KKK just wasn't against blacks, it was against basically everybody that wasn't a white person.
Very true. Yeah.
So, race, background, ethnicity.
Absolutely. So 41. This is the last thing to end on. So this is an Issaquah drive yourself historical tour. It was printed in the Issaquah Press in the 1980s. It was basically an ad for come to Issaquah, explore our history, come shop. This is what we're all about. And they included KKK site on that driving tour.
What does it say? Because if you could just read.
I tried to look. It's really hard. Yeah.
Presentation.
It's really, really hard to read because it's a scan. I even tried to like put it through like an AI reader, and it couldn't pick up exactly what it was saying. Yeah.
It's right in there.
The fiery electrical cross, 40 feet high, so I can see that. But anyway, it's very blatant, I think. So I think I'll leave it there. I will stop sharing. Then for probably the next 8 minutes or so, I'm going to turn off the recording and the camera, just so if there are any thoughts or anything we want to process together, I want to create a safe space. I've gotten permission from the clerk's office to do this. Council did this recently, so I'm going to go to that real quick.
and great conversation. We will definitely keep doing these in the future. Because equity is so central to policy discussion. So, and with that, we will go off to reports. For the work plan.
Yeah, so next month, October, we have, as I mentioned, light rail visioning. Thomas will be coming, and then John and I will be presenting on landscape strip standards. That's a new additional item. Landscape standards within the landscape standards. And then we also we'll have to discuss ideal times for the November meeting, since the November meeting right now take place right before Thanksgiving, so we're not going to do that. So TBD on that.
Okay. Any staff report?
Make sure that you two get your new tags.
Oh.
And then I was just going to say we got to set the November date. That's all.
Chair report, you report? No. Great. Any other business or announcements? No. Okay. And with that, we're going to be adjourned at 8:10. Yeah.